The great chamber floated in the void like a jewel made of light and crystal. It orbited a neutron star that pulsed with deadly radiation, but inside the station, representatives from 47 different alien civilizations sat in perfect comfort. The Galactic Council had chosen this place deliberately. The neutron star reminded everyone that the universe was dangerous, and only through cooperation could civilized species survive. Today, the Council would decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by beings that would have seemed impossible to her grandmother. The Zarathians towered 3 meters tall, their crystalline bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. The Velshara resembled nothing so much as floating jellyfish, their transparent bodies filled with swirling thoughts made visible. The Concordat representatives were synthetic beings, their metal bodies perfect and unchanging. Dozens of other species filled the chamber, some breathing methane, some existing as pure energy fields, all united in their concern about the youngest member of their council. Sarah had known this day was coming. She had prepared for it, rehearsed her arguments, consulted with the best legal minds Earth had to offer, but standing here now, surrounded by civilizations millions of years older than humanity, she felt small and alone. The Zarathian prime speaker raised one crystalline arm, and the chamber fell silent. Light pulsed through his body as he spoke, his voice like wind chimes in a storm. We gathered to address the question of Earth and its human population. 73 standard years have passed since humanity discovered faster than light travel and petitioned for council membership. 73 years since we welcomed them as friends and partners. In that brief time, humanity has tested our patience and violated our trust repeatedly. Sarah kept her face neutral, but her heart sank. This was not starting well. A Velshara floated forward, its thought patterns creating ripples in the air. When it spoke, the words seemed to form directly in Sarah's mind. 3 diplomatic incidents. The humans established a colony on Theta Praxis 7 without permission, violating Kethmar territorial rights. They broke the Outer Rim trade embargo by selling weapons to the Sill during their civil conflict. And their vessels repeatedly ignored navigation protocols in the Trevian lanes, causing 2 collisions with commercial traffic. We apologized for those incidents, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fear. Mistakes were made. We paid reparations. We implemented new training protocols. Training protocols? The Velshara's thoughts turned sharp, almost cutting. You speak as if these were accidents. But our analysis suggests a pattern. Humanity does not make mistakes. Humanity pushes boundaries deliberately to see what they can gain. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Sarah felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. The Concordat representative spoke next, its voice perfectly modulated and emotionless. There is another matter. Humanity's development of artificial intelligence continues to accelerate beyond safe parameters. We have shared our cautionary data. We have explained the risks. 17 civilizations in galactic history have been destroyed by their own synthetic creations. Yet humanity persists in their research, claiming they can control what others could not. Our AI development is careful and regulated, Sarah protested. We have safeguards. You have existed as a technological species for less than 500 years, the Concordat replied. We have existed for 6 million. We understand these dangers in ways you cannot comprehend. Your confidence is not wisdom. It is ignorance pretending to be courage. More agreement from the assembly. Sarah could feel the decision crystallizing around her, solid and immovable as stone. But the worst accusation came from a small, furry species called the Pontari. Their representative stood barely a meter tall, but their voice carried the weight of deep concern. The expansion rate troubles us most. Humanity has colonized 89 star systems in 7 decades. 89. The Velshara took 3,000 years to reach such numbers. The Zarathians took 5,000. This pace is not sustainable. It is not responsible. It speaks to a hunger that frightens us. We have many people, Sarah said. Our population grows quickly. We need space and resources. So you take, the Pontari replied sadly, without asking, without waiting, without considering that others might need those same resources in the future. You consume like locusts, Ambassador Chen. And when you have consumed everything within reach, what then? Will you look to our worlds with the same hunger? The chamber erupted in discussion. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages, translated instantly by the station's computers into something Sarah could understand. The consensus was clear. Humanity was dangerous. Humanity was reckless. Humanity could not be trusted to share the galaxy with older, wiser species. The Zarathian Prime Speaker called for order. The cacophony faded. "A proposal has been submitted," the Prime Speaker announced. "The Council will vote on whether to revoke Earth's membership and impose a quarantine zone of 50 light-years radius around the Sol system. All human colonies, stations, and vessels beyond this boundary must be withdrawn within 10 standard years. Humanity will be confined to their home system until such time as they demonstrate the maturity necessary for galactic citizenship." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Exile. They were voting to exile humanity to a single star system, to undo 70 years of expansion and exploration in a single legislative act. "You can't do this," she said, and hated how desperate she sounded. "We have rights. We have treaties. Treaties can be revoked when one party proves themselves unworthy," the Velshara replied. "This is not punishment, Ambassador. This is protection. We are protecting you from yourselves and protecting the galaxy from your immaturity." "I request the opportunity to speak in our defense," Sarah said formally. "By council law, the accused must be heard." The Prime Speaker nodded. "You may speak." "Be brief," Sarah took a breath. She had prepared a speech, full of statistics and legal arguments and appeals to reason, but looking at the faces around her, alien and strange and already decided, she knew none of that would matter. So she spoke from the heart instead. "You look at us and see children," she said quietly. "Loud, messy children who don't know the rules and break things without meaning to. Maybe that's fair. We're young. We're still learning. But being young doesn't make us wrong. Yes, we expand quickly, because we're excited about what's out here, because for the first time in our history, we're not alone in the universe. Yes, we make mistakes, because we're trying things, experimenting, pushing forward. Yes, we develop AI and genetic engineering and weapons that frighten you, because standing still means dying, and humanity has never been good at standing still." She turned slowly, meeting as many eyes as she could. "You've had millions of years to become wise and careful and slow. We've had thousands. You can't expect us to be like you. We're not like you, and maybe that's exactly why you're afraid." "Your point, Ambassador?" the Prime Speaker asked coldly. "My point is that exiling us won't change what we are. It will only make us bitter. It will teach us that the galaxy is not a place of cooperation, but of fear and control. Is that really the lesson you want to teach a young species? Because I promise you we will learn it very well." Silence filled the chamber. For a moment, Sarah dared to hope that her words had reached them. Then the Velshara spoke. Passionate words. "But words are all humanity offers. We require more than poetry. We require proof that you can control your impulses. You have provided none." "The vote will proceed," the Prime Speaker announced. "All in favor of human quarantine and exile, signal your approval." Lights began to glow around the chamber. Red for approval, green for opposition, blue for abstention. Sarah watched the colors appear, each one a judgment on her entire species. Red, red, red. The crimson lights multiplied like blood drops spreading through water. The Zarathians voted red. The Velshara voted red. The Concordat voted red. Species Sarah had never even spoken to voted red, following the lead of the great powers. A few green lights appeared. The Kethmar voted against exile, perhaps remembering human aid during their plague. The Sil voted green, grateful for those weapons despite the embargo violation. The Pontari surprisingly voted green as well, though their representative looked pained. But the blue lights of abstention outnumbered the green. 8 species chose neutrality, unwilling to defend humanity but uncomfortable condemning them. When the count finished, the result was clear. 39 in favor, 8 abstentions, 3 opposed. "The motion carries," the Prime Speaker announced. "Humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. A quarantine zone of 50 light-years radius will be established around the Sol system. All human presence beyond this boundary must withdraw within 10 standard years. This session is concluded." Sarah stood frozen as the chamber began to empty. Representatives filed out, some avoiding her gaze, others watching her with what might have been pity or satisfaction. She had failed. After 70 years of human presence in the galaxy, it was ending. Everything they had built, All the colonies and stations and dreams of a future among the stars would be dismantled and abandoned. As she turned to leave, a figure blocked her path. The Threnody observer stood there, a being wrapped in robes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Threnody never voted, never spoke in council sessions. They were the oldest species in the galaxy, ancient beyond measure, and they attended council meetings only to watch and remember. The Threnody leaned close, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something vast and alien within those robes. When it spoke, its voice was like stones grinding together in the depths of the earth. "They have made a grave miscalculation." "What?" Sarah whispered. "Fear makes species stupid. They believe confining you will keep them safe. They do not understand that cages do not hold creatures like humans. Cages only teach them to hate their jailers." The Threnody paused. "I have watched your species for 70 years, Ambassador. I have studied your history before you reached the stars. You are the most dangerous beings the galaxy has seen in 10 million years, not because you are cruel or evil, but because you refuse to accept limitations. The Council thinks they have neutralized a threat. They have only postponed a reckoning." The Threnody moved past her, robes flowing like liquid shadow. Sarah stood alone in the empty chamber, the words echoing in her mind. The station's lights seemed dimmer now, and through the transparent walls she could see the neutron star pulsing with its deadly rhythm. She activated her communication device and sent a single encrypted message back to Earth. It contained only 3 words. "They voted Exile." The response came instantly from the Prime Minister himself. "Come home. We have planning to do." Sarah took one last look at the council chamber. 70 years of human dreams had died here today, but as she walked toward her ship, she felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Not despair, not defeat, determination. The galaxy thought it had solved its human problem. The galaxy was about to learn just how wrong it could be. The news reached Earth like a shockwave traveling through humanity's collective consciousness. Within hours of Ambassador Chen's encrypted message, the information had spread to every settlement, every station, every ship in human space. The Galactic Council had voted to exile them. Humanity had 10 years to abandon everything they had built beyond the solar system. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On Mars Colony, 3 million people poured into the streets, their protests visible from orbit as crowds filled the red valleys between the domed cities. On Europa Station, miners went on strike, refusing to load ore shipments and demanding Earth declare war on the Council. In the Proxima system, the colonial governor gave a fiery speech broadcast across all human worlds, calling the Exile Decree an act of war and promising that Proxima would never surrender. Military hawks in Earth's parliament demanded immediate action. Admiral Zhang Wei, commander of humanity's small but modern fleet, presented battle plans for striking key council facilities. The ships were ready, he assured the Prime Minister. Human weapons might be primitive by galactic standards, but they were effective, and humans knew how to fight. "We fought 2 world wars on Earth," the Admiral said during the emergency cabinet session. "We survived nuclear standoffs. We colonized hostile planets. We are not a species that accepts defeat quietly." But Prime Minister Elizabeth Okafor had other ideas. She sat at the head of the table in the Emergency Command Center beneath Geneva, surrounded by holographic displays showing the chaos erupting across human space. Ministers shouted at each other. Generals presented military options. Colonial representatives demanded protection or independence or revenge. The Prime Minister let them argue for 3 hours. Then she stood, and the room fell silent. "We will comply with the Council's decree," she said quietly. The room exploded. Admiral Zhang slammed his fist on the table. The Minister of Colonial Affairs called it surrender. A dozen voices shouted at once, demanding she reconsider. "We will comply," the Prime Minister repeated, louder now. "But we will do so intelligently. Sit down, all of you, and listen." Something in her tone cut through the anger. The ministers and generals reluctantly took their seats. "The Council wants us contained," Okafor continued. "They fear what we might become. They're not entirely wrong to fear us. In 70 years, we've achieved what took other species thousands of years. We've pushed boundaries, broken rules, and made them uncomfortable. Now they think they can put us in a box and forget about us. So we just accept this?" the colonial minister asked bitterly. We accept that we cannot win a war against 47 civilizations with technology millions of years more advanced than ours, Okafor said. We accept that open defiance will give them an excuse to do worse than exile us. They could sterilize our planets. They could destroy our fleet. They could ensure humanity never leaves the solar system again. We will not give them that excuse. Then what do we do? Admiral Zhang asked. The Prime Minister smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We comply, publicly. We recall our colonies. We withdraw our ships. We give them exactly what they asked for. And while we do that, we prepare for a future they cannot imagine. She activated a holographic display that showed the Milky Way galaxy. The Council controls territory within the galactic disk. That's where all the major civilizations live, where the resources are easily accessible, where the trade routes flow. They think in terms of this space. She gestured to the bright spiral arms. But what lies beyond? Intergalactic space, someone said. The void between galaxies. Empty space, another voice added. No stars, no planets, nothing useful. Wrong, Okafor said. Intergalactic space contains rogue planets, free-floating resources, and most importantly, it contains the satellite galaxies. Small galaxies orbiting our own. The Council ignores them because reaching them requires traveling through the void, crossing hundreds of thousands of light years with nothing in between. It's not economically viable by their calculations. But we don't need it to be economically viable. We need it to be possible. Understanding began to dawn on faces around the table. You want to evacuate beyond the galaxy, Admiral Zhang said slowly. Not evacuate. Colonize. Plant seeds. The Prime Minister zoomed the display to show Earth's colonies. We have 127 million people in settlements beyond the solar system. The Council knows this. They're watching to make sure we bring them all home. But our census data is old, and incomplete, and possibly inaccurate. The Minister of Colonial Affairs caught on first. You want to hide people. Make it look like they came home when they actually went somewhere else. I want volunteers, Okafor said. People willing to leave everything behind and travel into the unknown. No communication with Earth, no resupply. No support. They'll be on their own possibly for centuries. They'll take with them ships, supplies, genetic samples, and the complete archive of human knowledge. They'll find those satellite galaxies, establish colonies, and build a civilization beyond the Council's reach. That's insane, someone whispered. That's human, the Prime Minister corrected. How many people do you think would volunteer for a one-way mission into intergalactic space if it meant giving humanity a future the Council can't take away? Admiral Zhang laughed suddenly, a sound without humor but full of grim satisfaction. You're asking for the craziest, most stubborn, most pioneer-minded people we have, the ones who won't accept being caged. Exactly. You'll get millions of volunteers. I'm counting on it. The plan took shape over the following weeks. It was called Operation Dandelion, named after the earth plant that spread its seeds on the wind to take root in unexpected places. The message went out through encrypted channels to every human settlement. Volunteers wanted for a mission into the unknown. No promises, no guarantees, no coming home. The response stunned even the optimists. 63 million people volunteered within the first month. Entire colonial administrations requested to be included. Mining guilds offered their expertise. Scientific teams competed for slots on the expedition. Families signed up together, preferring uncertain exile to humiliating surrender. The selection process was brutal. Only the most skilled, most stable, most adaptable individuals and groups were chosen. Engineers who could build from scratch. Scientists who could solve problems with limited resources. Farmers who could grow food in any environment. Teachers, doctors, pilots, miners, builders. The best of humanity's frontier spirit, distilled and concentrated into 63 million people who refused to give up on the stars. While Operation Dandelion proceeded in secret, the public exodus began. Transport ships filled with colonists departed from frontier worlds, heading back toward Earth. The Galactic Council monitored the traffic, satisfied to see humanity complying with their decree. They watched the heat signatures of thousands of ships crossing Council space, heading for Sol. What they didn't notice were the other ships, the ones that departed in different directions, their courses carefully plotted to avoid Council sensor networks, the ones that accelerated to maximum speed and disappeared into the darkness between the spiral arms, heading for empty space where no one watched. The Council didn't notice because they had never considered anyone would voluntarily go there. The exodus took 5 years. Ship after ship slipped away into the void, their heat trails fading into the background radiation of space. They carried everything they needed to start fresh: fusion reactors, genetic banks, manufacturing equipment, weapons, seeds, books, art, music, history. They carried human culture compressed into databanks and human hope compressed into cramped living quarters. Sarah Chen, no longer an ambassador, traveled with one of the first waves. She stood in the observation deck of the colony ship Perseverance, watching the Milky Way shrink behind them. The galaxy was a spiral of light in the darkness, beautiful and distant. Somewhere in that light, the Council was congratulating itself on solving the human problem. Beside her stood Captain Marcus Okonkwo, the military officer who had volunteered to command the expedition's defense fleet. He was young for his rank, only 38, but he had the kind of steady competence that inspired confidence. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. "I spent 5 years begging the Council to give humanity a chance. They wouldn't listen. They judged us based on fear instead of facts. Now we'll show them what humans can accomplish when we're not asking for permission. It might take centuries before we can return. Then it takes centuries. Our descendants will return, and when they do, the Council will regret the day they voted to exile us." Behind them, the galaxy continued to shrink. Ahead, the darkness stretched forever. The Perseverance was one of 10,000 ships making this journey, each heading for different regions of intergalactic space, each carrying a piece of humanity's future. Back on Earth, Ambassador Chen's replacement appeared before the Galactic Council exactly 10 years after the Exile decree. Every human colony had been evacuated. Every station had been dismantled. Every ship had returned to Sol. The quarantine boundary was activated, a sphere of monitoring stations 50 light-years in radius, all reporting that no human vessels attempted to cross. "Humanity has complied," the new ambassador announced. "We have withdrawn to our home system as requested. We hope that in time, when we have proven ourselves worthy, the Council will reconsider their decision." The statement was perfectly humble, perfectly compliant. The Council members congratulated themselves on their wisdom. The human problem had been solved peacefully, without violence, through the firm application of civilized law. The Threnody observer, watching from the shadows as always, said nothing. But if anyone had been paying attention, they would have noticed something that might have been amusement in those ancient alien eyes. In the depths of intergalactic space, Sarah Chen watched the stars of the Triangulum galaxy grow brighter through the observation port. They had been traveling for 8 years. The journey had been hard. 3 ships had been lost to navigation errors. 2 more had suffered catastrophic failures and been cannibalized for parts. But the rest of the fleet had survived, and now they approached their destination. 23 star systems in scanning range, the science officer reported. 17 have planets in the habitable zone. No signs of intelligent life. No Council presence. No one here but us. "Then let's get to work," Captain Okonkwo said. "We've got a civilization to build." The ships dispersed to different star systems. Colony pods dropped through atmospheres. Construction began on orbital stations. Mines opened on lifeless asteroids. Farms took root in alien soil. And everywhere, people worked with the desperate energy of those who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The Council had exiled humanity to teach them humility and caution. Instead, they had unleashed 63 million humans who had nothing to hold them back, no rules to follow, no authorities to appease. They were free to try anything, build anything, become anything. It would take time. Decades, certainly. Probably centuries. But humans had always been good at playing the long game when they needed to be. They would grow in secret, learn from their mistakes, develop technologies the Council had forbidden, and prepare for the day when they would return, because they would return. That was never in doubt. The Council had voted. Humanity had left, and while the Council argued about whether they had made the right decision, humanity acted. In the darkness between galaxies, a new civilization was being born. 200 years passed in the galaxy. For the great civilizations of the Galactic Council, This was barely a moment in their long histories. The Zarathians had existed for 8 million years. The Velshara had been exploring space when Earth's sun was still forming. 2 centuries were nothing to beings who thought in terms of geological epochs and stellar evolution. The exile of humanity faded from galactic consciousness, like a small ripple disappearing into a vast ocean. Young Zarathians learned about it in history classes as a footnote. The humans had been a briefly interesting species who expanded too quickly and had to be contained for their own good. A cautionary tale about the dangers of immature civilizations gaining access to faster-than-light travel before they were culturally ready. The quarantine around Sol remained in place. The boundary stations reported dutifully that no human ships attempted to cross. Long-range scans showed a civilization that had turned inward, focusing on development within their single star system rather than expansion. Earth's population had grown, of course, but they had built orbital habitats and underwater cities, rather than reaching for other stars. They appeared to have learned their lesson. Most council species forgot about humanity entirely. There were new concerns, new crises, new species being welcomed into the galactic community. The galaxy moved on, but not everyone forgot. The Threnodi remembered. They always remembered. In their ancient archives, they kept detailed records of humanity's exile and private predictions about what would come next. They shared these predictions with no one. The Threnodi had learned long ago that younger species never listened to warnings about the future. The 3 species who had voted against humanity's exile maintained secret communication channels with Sol. The Kethmar sent occasional trade ships to the boundary, exchanging goods through automated systems. The Sil transmitted cultural broadcasts, sharing art and music across the quarantine. The Pontari, despite their earlier concerns, had come to regret their role in the exile and quietly monitored Earth's development with something approaching guilt. These 3 species noticed things others missed. They noticed that Earth's responses were often delayed, sometimes by months. They noticed that human culture seemed strangely unified, lacking the diversity and conflict that usually characterize developing civilizations. They noticed that certain types of messages received no response at all, as if Earth was deliberately avoiding specific topics. But they said nothing. What could they say? That humanity seemed suspicious? The council would laugh. The exile was ancient history. Earth was contained. The problem was solved. Then the Velshara encountered something that should have been impossible. Research vessel Illuminated Thought had been exploring a dwarf galaxy designated K447, located 200,000 light-years beyond the Milky Way's edge. Such expeditions were rare. The journey took decades, and the small satellite galaxies usually contained nothing of value. But the Velshara pursued knowledge for its own sake, and K447 had shown unusual electromagnetic signatures. When they arrived, they found structures. Not natural structures. Not random asteroid formations or cosmic debris. Artificial megastructures on a scale that made even the Velshara pause in wonder. Dyson swarms surrounded 12 stars, collecting every photon of energy they produced. Ring habitats orbited 3 gas giants, each ring large enough to house billions. A network of space elevators connected planets to orbital manufacturing platforms that blazed with industrial heat. Impossible, the ship's science leader declared. K47 is barren. No intelligent species evolved here. These structures are recent, no more than 150 years old based on stellar wear patterns. Who built them? The exploration team examined the structures closely. They analyzed the metallurgical composition of the hull materials. They studied the design philosophy. They scanned for technological signatures. Every test gave the same impossible answer. Human, the lead metallurgist reported. These alloys match human manufacturing tolerances exactly. The design principles are human. The radiation shielding uses human patterns. These are human structures. Humans were exiled to Sol, the science leader said. They do not have the range to reach K447. Their fastest ships require decades to cross intergalactic space. They could not have built this. The evidence says otherwise. Then the evidence is wrong. Run the tests again. They ran the tests again. The results did not change. The structures were definitely human in origin, approximately 140 years old, and showed signs of ongoing development. Someone had been building here for over a century, gradually transforming an entire dwarf galaxy into a unified industrial complex. The Velshara sent probes to explore further. What they found deepened the mystery. The habitats were empty of life, maintained by automated systems, but the manufacturing platforms were active, producing ships and equipment and materials with no organic supervision. It was as if humans had built this entire infrastructure, then disappeared, leaving their machines to continue the work. The illuminated thought attempted to penetrate one of the habitats. The airlock opened easily, but as soon as they entered, alarms activated. Lights blazed throughout the structure. Defensive systems came online, and a message broadcast in 1,000 languages, including Velshara. Unauthorized access detected. This facility is property of the human diaspora. Departure is advised. Humanity remembers. The team fled. They had not survived 200 years of deep space exploration by ignoring warnings. As their ship accelerated away from K447, they watched the megastructures recede, still blazing with light and activity, still producing ships and materials for purposes unknown. The report they filed upon returning to Council space was marked as classified immediately. Too many questions, too few answers, and most troubling of all, too much potential for panic. Because if humans had somehow reached K447 and built those structures, what else had they accomplished in 200 years of exile? The Zarathian Intelligence Directorate reviewed the Velshara report with growing concern. They dispatched their own mission to K447 to verify the findings. The Zarathian ship arrived 6 months later and confirmed everything. The structures were real. They were human. And they were just the beginning. Expanding their search pattern, the Zarathians found evidence of human activity in 3 more dwarf galaxies. Not full colonies, but outposts, mining operations, relay stations, a network of infrastructure stretching through intergalactic space like a web. All of it automated. All of it maintained by machines while the humans themselves remained invisible. Where are they? The Zarathian mission commander demanded. We find their structures, their ships, their equipment, but no humans. Where is the population? No one could answer. The structures could theoretically support billions of inhabitants, but the habitats were empty. The ships were drones. The entire operation seemed designed to run itself while the actual humans stayed hidden somewhere else. The Zarathian command made a decision. They would investigate more thoroughly. They assembled a proper science fleet, equipped with the best sensors and weapons, and sent it to K447 with orders to find the humans and determine what they were doing in violation of their exile. The fleet never returned. The last transmission from the flagship showed the vessels approaching a structure the size of a small planet. The structure was covered in lights, thousands of them arranged in patterns. As the fleet drew closer, the patterns resolved into words in every major galactic language. Humanity remembers. Turn back. This is Zarathian Science Fleet 7, the commander transmitted. We are here under Council authority to investigate unauthorized colonial activity. We demand to speak with human representatives. The structure did not respond with words. Instead, it responded with action. Weapon systems that dwarfed anything in the Zarathian arsenal activated. Energy readings spiked to levels that would have powered a small star. The fleet's shields failed instantly under the assault. Retreat, the commander ordered. All ships retreat to. The transmission cut off. When the Council sent search parties weeks later, they found debris, twisted metal floating in the void. No survivors. No black boxes. No evidence of what had happened except that the Zarathian fleet had encountered something far beyond their ability to handle. The Council convened an emergency session. For the first time in 2 centuries, humanity was the topic of serious discussion, except humans were not present. Earth sat in its quarantine, silent and distant, while the Council argued about what to do. We must investigate Sol, the new Zarathian Prime Speaker demanded. Clearly, humans have been violating their exile. We need to know how many have left the quarantine zone and where they have gone. The boundary stations report no violations, Velshara reminded them. No ships have crossed in 200 years. Then how did they reach K447? No one had an answer. The numbers did not work. Even if every human ship had left Sol the moment of the exile decree, traveling at maximum speed, they could not have reached K447 more than 50 years ago. Yet the structures there were a century and a half old. Perhaps the dating is wrong, someone suggested weakly. Multiple independent analyses confirmed the dating, the Velshara replied. Those structures are old, which means humans began building them during their exile, possibly before the quarantine was fully established. Understanding rippled through the chamber. During those first few years after the exile decree, when humanity was supposedly recalling their colonies, they must have also been sending ships into intergalactic space, ships that had slipped past council sensors because no one thought to watch for vessels heading away from the galaxy, rather than toward it. They deceived us, the Zarathian speaker said, his crystalline body flashing with anger. From the very beginning, they never intended to comply. They pretended to accept the exile while secretly establishing colonies beyond our reach. We should send a fleet to Sol, someone suggested. Demand answers. Impose real consequences if they refuse to cooperate. Or, the Threnody observer spoke for only the second time in 10 million years. You could wait and see what happens next. The chamber fell silent. Every species turned to look at the ancient being in the shadows. You knew, the Zarathian speaker accused. You knew humans were doing this. I suspected, the Threnody corrected. I understand humans better than you do. They are not a species that accepts confinement. Your exile decree did not contain them. It only motivated them to prove you wrong. They violated council law. They found a loophole. You exiled them from the galaxy. They left the galaxy. You should have been more specific in your terms. The Threnody's ancient eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. Now you face a choice. Do you escalate this conflict by attacking Sol, or do you wait and see what humanity does next? Because I promise you, they are not finished yet. The structures you found are not colonies. They are preparations. Humanity is building something in the dark, and when they are ready, they will reveal it. We will not be threatened by exiled primitives, the Zarathian speaker declared. Then you are a fool, the Threnody said simply. But that is nothing new. The Council has been foolish about humanity from the beginning. Continue if you wish. I will watch. I always watch, and I will remember who ignored wisdom when it was freely given. The Council debated for weeks. Some wanted immediate military action. Others counseled patience. The Velshara proposed sending a diplomatic mission to Sol to open negotiations. The Concordate calculated probabilities and concluded that the situation was too unpredictable for reliable assessment. While they argued, more reports filtered in. A mining operation found in the small Magellanic Cloud. Human-designed relay stations discovered in the intergalactic void. Automated defensive platforms scattered throughout satellite galaxies. Everywhere the Council looked outside the Milky Way proper, they found evidence of human activity. 200 years of silence had not been humanity learning their lesson. It had been humanity preparing for something the Council could not yet imagine. And in the depths of intergalactic space, in colonies that now numbered in the thousands, spread across 100 satellite galaxies, 400 billion humans continued their work. Building, growing, developing, waiting. Soon they knew. Soon the wait would be over. Soon they would return home. And the galaxy would never be the same. 300 years after the exile decree, the quarantine boundary around Sol went dark. All 10,000 monitoring stations simultaneously ceased broadcasting. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment they were transmitting their regular reports of an empty boundary, with no violations. The next moment, nothing. Just silence spreading across 50 light-years of space. The Council's response was immediate. Emergency protocols activated. Fleets scrambled from a dozen nearby systems. The Zarathians, still bitter about their lost science fleet, sent their finest warships. The Velshara dispatched their most advanced sensor vessels. Even species that barely remembered humanity's exile sent representatives to investigate. What they found stopped them cold. The solar system had transformed into something beyond their comprehension. Where once there had been a single inhabited planet and a handful of primitive stations, there now existed a megastructure complex that rivaled anything the great civilizations had built in millions of years of development. Earth remained at the center, still blue and green and beautiful, but now it was orbited by 3 massive rings of habitats, each one a complete ecosystem unto itself. The rings glittered in the sunlight, home to 50 billion humans who had never set foot on a planet. Mars was no longer red. Terraforming had succeeded, turning the dead world into a living one covered in blue oceans and green continents. Venus had been dismantled entirely. its mass reorganized into an orbital manufacturing complex that stretched across space like a metallic flower, petals of industrial platforms catching the sun's light. The asteroid belt was gone. In its place, a perfect sphere of processing stations maintained exact orbital positions, working in concert to refine materials and produce equipment on a scale that made the watching aliens question their understanding of economics. Jupiter's moons had become shipyards, each one covered in construction berths that even now held partially completed vessels. Saturn's rings had been mined flat, the resources used to build the habitats and platforms that now crowded near Earth space. But the real shock came at the system's edge. Arrayed in perfect battle formation, positioned precisely at the 50 light-year boundary where the quarantine had been, waited a fleet of 100,000 warships. Not primitive vessels. Not the crude human ships that had existed 3 centuries ago. These were sleek, deadly machines that made even the Zerathian admiral watching them feel a chill of concern. They were large, well-armed, and built with a design philosophy that spoke of hard lessons learned and technologies perfected through centuries of secret development. The fleet's flagship activated a communication laser, pinpointing every council vessel with perfect accuracy. A human face appeared on their screens, a man in his 50s with gray in his hair and the kind of calm confidence that comes from holding all the winning cards. I am Admiral Marcus Okonkwo, commander of the Terran Defense Fleet. On behalf of humanity, I thank the Galactic Council for the gift of 3 centuries of peace and isolation. We use the time well, the Zerathian admiral responded immediately, his translated voice sharp with authority. This is a violation of your exile decree. You were confined to the solar system. This fleet and these structures exceed anything that should have been possible for your technology level. We never left the solar system, Okonkwo replied with a slight smile. As you can see, all human presence is within 50 light-years of Sol, exactly as the Council specified. We have obeyed the letter of your law perfectly. You developed weapons in violation of Council regulations. What regulations? You expelled us from the Council. Your laws no longer apply to us. We've been operating as an independent civilization for 300 years, free to develop whatever technology we choose. Surely the Council supports the principle of civilizational sovereignty. The Admiral had no response to that. The human was technically correct. You could not exile a species from your organization and then expect them to follow your rules. Other Council vessels began arriving, drawn by reports of the barrier failure. Hundreds of ships now crowded the boundary, representatives from dozens of species, all staring at the transformed solar system and trying to process what it meant. A Velshara science vessel attempted a deep scan of the human fleet. Their sensors were the best in the galaxy, capable of analyzing molecular structure across light years. What they detected made their sensor operators question the data. These ships use technologies we do not recognize, the Velshara captain reported to the fleet. The power sources are not fusion or antimatter. The hull composition includes materials not found in our database. The weapon systems operate on principles our physics cannot immediately explain. This is not 300 years of incremental development. This is a technological revolution. How? Someone demanded. How did they accomplish this alone, without trade, without access to Council knowledge? Admiral Okonkwo's smile widened as if he had heard the question. You're wondering how we advanced so far so fast? The answer is simple. You assumed we were alone. You thought exiling us to Sol meant confining all of humanity to one star system. That was your mistake. He paused, letting the words sink in. 3 centuries ago, when you voted to exile us, 63 million humans chose not to return home. They took 10,000 ships and left the galaxy entirely, while you watched Earth congratulating yourselves on solving the human problem. Those 63 million were establishing colonies in the satellite galaxies, building infrastructure in intergalactic space, and developing technologies without the limitations your regulations imposed. The transmission shifted, showing a new image, a star map, but not of the Milky Way. This showed the space beyond the galaxy marked with thousands of bright points representing human settlements. The small Magellanic Cloud was covered in them. The Triangulum Galaxy showed hundreds of colonies. Dozens of dwarf galaxies glowed with human presence. And throughout the vast dark between galaxies, relay stations and outposts created a network connecting it all. We are not confined to Sol, Okonkwo continued. We are a civilization of 400 billion people, spread across 200 satellite galaxies in the intergalactic void. We control more star systems than the entire Galactic Council combined. We have spent 3 centuries learning, building, and preparing. And now we are ready to come home. The watching aliens felt something they rarely experienced: genuine fear. This was not a small isolated species begging for readmission to galactic society. This was a superpower announcing its existence and demanding recognition. You cannot invade Council space. The Zarathian admiral tried to sound authoritative, but his voice wavered. We have defenses. We have military forces that dwarf yours. Do you? Okonkwo asked mildly. Admiral, I'm going to share something with you. In the 300 years since our exile, we've fought 17 wars against ourselves. Civil conflicts, colonial disputes, wars over resources and ideology, and simple human stubbornness. We've perfected warfare in ways you cannot imagine because your species have been at peace for millennia. We know how to build weapons, how to deploy them, and how to win against desperate odds. Our smallest warship carries more firepower than your flagship. Would you really like to test whether your defenses can stop us? The threat hung in the space between the fleets. The Zarathian admiral looked at his sensors, at the human ships waiting in perfect formation, and made a calculation. His fleet outnumbered the humans 10-1. But those human ships were unknown quantities, built with technologies his people did not understand. And behind them, the solar system bristled with defensive platforms that could probably destroy his entire fleet before they crossed half the distance.
He made the wise choice.
I will report this to the Council. Do not advance beyond the boundary. We won't, Okonkwo assured him. Not yet. We're not invaders, Admiral. We're neighbors who have been away for a while. Tell the Council we're ready to talk. They exiled us 300 years ago because they feared what we might become. Now they can see exactly what we became. The question is whether they can accept it. The Council vessels began to withdraw, retreating to safe distances while maintaining surveillance. More ships arrived every hour as word spread through the galactic network. Within days, representatives from every major species gathered at the boundary, staring at the impossible transformation of humanity and trying to decide what to do about it. But the real shock came a week later when sensors detected heat blooms in deep space. Ships accelerating toward the Milky Way from every direction. Hundreds at first, then thousands, then millions. The great fleet of the human diaspora was returning home. They came from the Magellanic Clouds. They came from Triangulum. They came from tiny dwarf galaxies whose names appeared in no galactic charts. They came from the intergalactic void, where they had built cities on rogue planets and stations that harvested energy from dark matter itself. They came in ships that dwarfed anything the Council had ever built. Massive colony vessels carrying billions of people eager to see the Milky Way their ancestors had been forced to abandon. The watching aliens realized with growing horror that the 100,000 ships at Sol were not humanity's fleet. They were just the home guard. The real fleet was still arriving.
How many?
The Velshara science captain whispered, watching the sensor displays light up with contact after contact after contact. Current count is 3 million vessels and rising, her sensor operator reported. Estimated time to arrival at the galactic boundary, 30 standard days. Estimated total population aboard, 200 billion. 200 billion humans returning from exile. 200 billion people who had spent their entire lives beyond the galaxy, in colonies that had never known council law or council culture. 200 billion individuals who had been raised on stories of how the Council had feared their ancestors and tried to contain them. The Council held emergency sessions that lasted for days. Some species demanded military mobilization, others urged diplomacy. The Concordat ran probability calculations and determined that a war with humanity had a 97% chance of resulting in mutual devastation, regardless of who technically won. The Zarathian prime speaker, old now and tired, stood before the assembly and spoke the words no one wanted to hear, but everyone knew were true. We made a mistake 300 years ago. We saw a young, vigorous species and felt threatened by their potential. We thought we could contain them, control them, keep them safely away from us until they learned to be less dangerous. Instead, we gave them the greatest gift possible: freedom from our rules, our oversight, our limitations. We exiled them, and in doing so, we created exactly the threat we feared. He paused, his crystalline body dim with shame. Now they are returning, and we must decide. Do we fight a war we probably cannot win against a civilization that controls more resources than we do? Or do we accept that humanity has earned, through 3 centuries of achievement, the right to return to the galaxy as equals? The chamber fell silent. Every species knew the answer, even if they did not want to admit it. War would be devastation. Peace would be humiliation, but humiliation could be survived. Devastation might not be. The Threnody observer spoke for the 3rd time in their long existence. You have a choice. Fear them and fight them and lose everything, or accept them and learn from them and perhaps become better yourselves. I have watched civilizations rise and fall for 10 million years. I have seen this pattern before. The species that survive are not the strongest or the oldest. They are the ones that adapt. Can you adapt? Or will you add yourselves to the long list of civilizations that fell because they could not accept change? The question hung in the air unanswered. Outside the council chamber, the human fleet waited. 200 billion people watched the galaxy that had once rejected them, wondering if they would be welcomed home or if they would have to take by force what should have been theirs by right. The galaxy had voted 300 years ago. Humanity had left. The galaxy had argued about whether it was right. Now humanity was acting, and the galaxy would have to respond. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so crowded. Every species sent their highest representatives, their most skilled diplomats, their wisest leaders. This was not a routine session. This was a moment that would define the next era of galactic history. The chamber that had once voted to exile humanity, now prepared to decide whether to accept their return or face the consequences of refusing. Admiral Marcus Okonkwo stood in the center of the chamber, flanked by Sarah Chen's great-great-great-granddaughter, Ambassador Michael Chen Okoye. The young man carried himself with the same dignity his ancestor had shown 3 centuries before, but there was a crucial difference. Sarah had stood here as a supplicant begging for mercy. Michael stood here as an equal, representing a civilization that had proven itself beyond any doubt. Beyond the station's walls, the human fleet maintained its position. 3 million ships arranged in formations that demonstrated both military precision and overwhelming force. The Council knew those ships could destroy every station and colony in the galaxy if humanity chose war. But they also knew humanity was offering peace. The question was what price that peace would carry. The Zarathian Prime Speaker called the session to order. His crystalline body was dimmer than it had been centuries ago, when a younger version of himself had voted for exile. Age and wisdom had taught him the cost of fear-based decisions. Ambassador Chen Okoye, Admiral Okonkwo, humanity has requested the opportunity to address this council. We grant this request, though you are no longer members of this body. Speak. Michael stepped forward. He had prepared a speech, formal and diplomatic, but standing here in the place where his ancestor had been rejected, he chose honesty instead. 300 years ago, humanity was exiled from this council. You told us we were too aggressive, too fast-growing, too dangerous to share the galaxy with civilized species. You gave us 10 years to recall our colonies and return to Earth. You thought you were teaching us a lesson. You thought you were protecting the galaxy from our potential for chaos. He paused, letting the words settle. You were wrong. Not wrong about what we were, but wrong about what exiling us would accomplish. You did not teach us to be cautious. You taught us that the Council could not be trusted. You did not protect the galaxy from us. You freed us from the regulations and oversight that limited our development. And you did not eliminate the threat you feared. You made it inevitable. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Velshara representative floated forward, its thought patterns sharp with anxiety. Are you threatening us? No, Michael said simply. I'm explaining cause and effect. You made a choice 300 years ago based on fear. That choice had consequences. We are those consequences. Now you must make another choice, and I'm here to explain what your options are. Admiral Okonkwo activated a holographic display showing the extent of human civilization. The satellite galaxies glowed with colonies. The intergalactic void was crisscrossed with trade routes and communication networks. Resource extraction operations surrounded rogue planets and harvested material from dark matter streams. The display showed a civilization that had accomplished in 3 centuries what the Council races had taken millions of years to achieve. This is humanity today, Okonkwo said. 400 billion people, 300,000 colonized star systems, industrial capacity that exceeds the combined output of the entire Galactic Council. We control more resources, more territory, and more advanced technology than any civilization in this chamber. You boast of your achievements, a Zarathian representative said coldly, but you built them in violation of your exile. We built them beyond your jurisdiction, Michael corrected. You exiled us from the galaxy. We left the galaxy. Everything we built was outside council space, using resources that belonged to no one, following no laws but our own. We violated nothing. We simply did what humanity does best. We adapted. We expanded. We thrived. He turned slowly, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as possible. Now we are ready to return home. Not as beggars asking permission. Not as criminals accepting punishment. As equals demanding recognition. The question before this council is simple. Will you accept us peacefully, or will you force us to take what we have earned through our achievements? The chamber erupted. Voices shouted in a dozen languages. The Zarathians accused humanity of blackmail. The Velshara demanded to know if this was an invasion threat. Smaller species looked terrified, caught between the galaxy's established powers and the returning human civilization. The Concordate representative spoke, its synthetic voice cutting through the chaos. You present a false choice. Accept you or face war. But there is a third option. We could mobilize our combined forces and contain you before you can establish a foothold in the galaxy. Your fleet is large, but ours would be larger. Okonkwo's smile held no humor. You could try. Shall I explain why that would be a mistake? First, you would need time to mobilize and coordinate 47 different species' military forces. We estimate 6 months minimum. During that time, we would not wait politely. We would establish bases, fortify positions, and secure strategic locations. Second, you are assuming our 3 million ships represent our total military capacity. They don't. They represent the expeditionary force. Our actual fleet is 20 million ships, with more being built every day in shipyards you cannot reach. Third, and most important, you assume we would fight a conventional war. He let that sink in. We spent 3 centuries preparing for the possibility that the Council would reject our return. We have weapons you cannot counter because your regulations prevented you from developing them. We have strategies refined through 17 wars against ourselves. We have a population raised on the story of their ancestors' exile, motivated by 300 years of resentment. Do you really want to find out if your civilizations can survive a war against an enemy like that? The silence that followed was heavy with fear and calculation. Species that had known peace for millennia suddenly understood what humanity represented. Not evil, not cruelty. Simply the willingness to fight with absolute conviction for what they believed they deserved. The Threnody observer moved forward, its robes seeming to absorb the light itself. The ancient being had remained silent until now, watching humanity's presentation with the patience of a species that had witnessed the rise and fall of thousands of civilizations. The Council faces not a military problem, but a philosophical one, the Threnody said, its voice like stones grinding in the depths of space. You must decide what kind of galaxy you wish to live in, one based on fear and control, where new species are contained when they show potential, or one based on achievement and merit, where civilizations are judged by what they accomplish rather than what they might become. The Threnody turned to face the full Council. 300 years ago, you saw humanity's potential and feared it. You tried to contain them, and in doing so, you created exactly what you feared. Now they stand before you, powerful and proven, offering partnership instead of demanding conquest. They could take what they want by force. Instead, they come with terms. Will you be wise enough to accept them? Michael activated another display, showing humanity's formal proposal. Our terms are these. First, the exile decree is formally rescinded. Second, humanity is granted full council membership with veto powers equal to the founding species. Third, a new framework is established where no species can be expelled without unanimous consent. These are our requirements for peaceful integration. And in exchange? The Zarathian speaker asked. Full technology sharing, Okonkwo said. Everything we developed during exile becomes available to council members. Our FTL drives that are 10 times faster than yours. Our energy generation systems. Our manufacturing techniques. Our agricultural methods. Everything. Additionally, we offer access to resources in the satellite galaxies and the intergalactic void. And most importantly, we offer a mutual defense pact. Our fleet, our technology, our determination, all in defense of council space and member species. The offer was generous, suspiciously generous. The Velshara representative voiced what many were thinking. Why would you share your advantages? You could dominate the council through technological superiority. Because that's not what we want, Michael said simply. We don't want to rule you. We just want you to stop trying to control us. We want to be part of the galactic community, not separate from it. We spent 300 years alone in the dark. It was necessary. It was productive. But it was also lonely. We're social beings. We want neighbors, partners, friends. We just refuse to be children who need your permission to grow. He paused. Besides, technological dominance is temporary. If we share our advances, you'll catch up within a few decades. But if we establish a framework of mutual respect and cooperation now, that could last for millennia. That's what we're really offering. Not just technology, but a new way of thinking about how civilizations interact. The council debated for 3 days. Private meetings, public arguments. Species caucused with their allies, calculated their options, weighed the risks of acceptance against the risks of rejection. The Zarathians resisted longest, their pride wounded by being proven so catastrophically wrong 3 centuries earlier. But even they eventually recognized reality. On the 3rd day, the vote was called. The chamber fell silent as species prepared to signal their positions. This time, no one voted quickly. Each representative took time to consider, to ensure they understood what their vote would mean for the future. Red lights for rejection, green lights for acceptance, blue lights for abstention. The first green light appeared. The Kethmar, who had voted against Exile 3 centuries ago, voted for acceptance now. The Sil followed immediately. The Puntari hesitated only a moment before adding their green light. More greens appeared. The Concordat, after running their probability calculations, determined that cooperation offered better outcomes than conflict. The Velshara, recognizing that human achievements deserved recognition, voted green. Smaller species followed, taking courage from the larger powers. Only the Zarathians held out. Their light remained dark, neither red nor green nor blue. The entire chamber waited, watching the species that had been humanity's harshest critics. Finally, the old Zarathian prime speaker rose. His crystalline body pulsed with colors that reflected both shame and acceptance. 300 years ago, I stood in this chamber as a young speaker and voted to exile humanity. I believed we were protecting the galaxy from a dangerous, immature species. I was wrong. Not about what humanity was, but about what they could become. We saw their potential and responded with fear instead of guidance. We tried to contain them instead of teaching them. And in doing so, we made them prove themselves in ways that exceeded anything we could have imagined. He turned to Michael and Okonkwo. You accomplished in 3 centuries what we thought impossible. You built a civilization that rivals our own. You developed technologies we cannot match. You proved that humanity deserves not just membership in this council, but leadership within it. I vote to accept your terms, and I apologize on behalf of my people for the injustice we committed against yours. The Zarathian light turned green. 46 species approved. 1 abstained. None rejected. The chamber erupted in something between celebration and relief. The crisis was over. War had been avoided. A new era had begun. Michael felt his ancestors' spirit in that moment. The woman who had stood in this same chamber and been rejected. Sarah Chen had died 200 years ago, but she had lived long enough to see the first successful colonies in the satellite galaxies. She had known humanity would return someday. Now her descendant had completed what she started. The formal ceremony took hours. Documents were signed. Treaties were ratified. Speeches were made. But the real work began immediately. Human engineers started sharing their FTL designs with council scientists. Trade negotiations opened between human colonies and council worlds. Cultural exchange programs were established. The boundaries that had separated humanity from the galaxy for 300 years dissolved as if they had never existed. 5 years after humanity's return, Ambassador Chen Okoye stood before the council with a new proposal. The Pathfinder Initiative, a joint council human project to explore beyond the local galactic cluster, not to conquer, not to exploit, but to find new civilizations and invite them to join as equals, learning from the mistakes that had been made with humanity. The proposal passed unanimously. Even the Zarathians voted in favor, recognizing that their greatest lesson had been learned from their greatest mistake. The expeditionary fleets began launching within months. Human ships with council crews exploring regions of space no civilization had ever reached. They carried a message to any species they found. You are not alone, you are welcome, and you will never be judged by what you might become, but by what you choose to achieve. In the darkness between galaxies, automated human stations continued their work. Monuments to the 63 million who had refused to accept exile. Each station bore a plaque with the same inscription. They voted, we left, they argued, we acted, and we came home. Humanity had learned its lesson too. The galaxy could debate endlessly about potential threats and theoretical dangers, but the future belonged to those who dared to act, to build, to achieve, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple, stubborn human refusal to accept limitations. The Threnody observer watched it all from the shadows, as they always did. They had been right, as they usually were. The Council's attempt to contain humanity had been futile from the start. You could not cage a species whose defining characteristic was the drive to explore, to expand, to push beyond every boundary. But the Threnody had also seen something unexpected. Humanity could have returned as conquerors. They had the power. They had the motivation. 300 years of exile had given them every reason to seek revenge. Instead, they returned as partners. They shared their advantages. They offered cooperation. They proved that their greatest strength was not their weapons or their technology, but their ability to forgive and move forward. Perhaps the Threnody thought humanity would surprise them all again. Perhaps this young, vigorous species would teach the ancient civilizations of the galaxy something they had forgotten over millions of years of comfortable existence. That growth required risk. That achievement required courage. That the future belonged not to those who feared change, but to those who embraced it. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. They would never forget the species that was exiled for being too dangerous and returned as saviors. They would never doubt that humans meant what they said and said what they meant, because humanity had proven beyond all question that when they acted, the entire galaxy had to respond. 300 years of silence had ended. A new age had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.